The sun had barely risen, yet the heat already pressed down on the sprawling naval training base in Virginia. Its metal roofs shimmered like molten silver, and the distant roar of fighter jets sliced through the crisp morning air. New cadets had begun to trickle in, dusty duffel bags dragging behind them, eyes squinting against the glare. The base was a crucible, a place where strength, wit, and resilience were tested until only the hardened remained. Among the sea of fresh faces, one newcomer immediately stood out. Riley Morgan moved with quiet precision, her back straight, shoulders squared, and every step measured. Her green eyes, sharp and assessing, flicked across the rows of barracks, scanning the unfamiliar territory like a predator sizing up its hunting ground. Her auburn hair was pulled tight into a functional braid, and though her uniform fit perfectly, there was an air about her that seemed unusual. She didn't fidget, didn't stumble, and didn't look lost. Most importantly, she didn't show fear. Whispers followed her as she walked. "She's the new girl," one cadet muttered to his friend. "New girl, she looks like she could bench press all of us combined," another replied, grinning. The boys laughed, the kind of loud, confident laughter that comes from years of feeling untouchable. They had no idea that Riley was not just another new girl. She had spent the past 8 years in environments that most people couldn't even imagine. Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, her resume was classified, her achievements unspoken. She was a SEAL combat expert, trained in infiltration, survival, and hand-to-hand combat that could disable a dozen opponents before breakfast. Yet here she was, blending into the world of cadets, waiting. Her duffel bag hit the floor with a soft thud as she entered the barracks. A few cadets paused, curious, craning their necks. She ignored them, methodically setting down her belongings. Her eyes flicked to a row of lockers. Inside, personal effects were neatly arranged. The organization pleased her. Attention to detail was always the first clue to someone's discipline level. A few knives glinted in the faint morning light, worn from practice. She ran a fingertip along the blade of one, testing its balance, though no one was watching. In that moment, Riley allowed herself a brief exhale. It was a new environment, yes, but one she could handle. She had handled worse, much worse. As she unpacked, a group of cadets approached, the first wave of their classic hazing ritual already forming in their heads. They didn't know her yet, and that was their mistake. "So, you're the new girl," one said, voice dripping with mock curiosity. Riley looked up calmly, meeting his gaze directly. "That's right," she said, her voice even, measured. "Riley Morgan." The cadet smirked. "Well, Riley, welcome to the base. Hope you can keep up." Riley's smile was polite but unreadable. She didn't say anything else. Inside, her mind was already running through the calculations of who might pose a threat, who might overstep. She noted each of their stances, the way their eyes darted, the subtle cues in their movements. Every detail mattered. By the afternoon, the cadets began their tests, minor pranks, snide comments, subtle physical challenges designed to embarrass or intimidate her. One cadet tossed a wet towel at her from across the hallway, smirking as it landed at her feet. Another whispered jokes about rookie mistakes and how the new girl would break under pressure. Riley bent down, picking up the towel with one fluid motion. She looked at it, then at the prankster. "Interesting," she said softly. Not a laugh, not a flinch, just a single word that carried a quiet weight. The cadets blinked, momentarily thrown off. Riley set the towel aside, her movements precise and deliberate. Every muscle under her uniform was coiled like a spring, capable of action at a moment's notice. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the base, the cadets gathered in the common area, sharing stories and laughter. Riley found a quiet corner, sitting alone, her notebook open on her lap. She wrote quickly, fluidly, jotting down observations, calculating distances, memorizing faces. The words weren't random, they were strategies, assessments, contingency plans. A cadet leaned against the doorway, peering at her. "What are you writing?" he asked with a half-smile. Riley didn't look up. "Notes," she said simply. He laughed nervously, unsure if she was joking. Most cadets wrote diaries or funny notes to friends. Riley wrote survival strategies. The whispers continued. She's weird, too quiet. She's probably weak. Riley smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. Inside, she felt a flicker of amusement. Weak. They had no idea. Their arrogance was as thick as the humidity that clung to the barracks walls. She could dismantle their assumptions without ever raising her voice. That was part of the game, the first rule of survival. Never let them know what you're capable of. Night fell and the barracks settled into uneasy silence. Most cadets were asleep, dreaming of glory or escape. Riley, however, remained awake, checking her gear, reviewing her notes. Every prank, every laugh, every whispered comment had been catalogued. Every weakness had been noted. Outside, a soft wind rustled the flags over the base. Riley's eyes, still sharp and unblinking, followed a shadow moving across the compound. She didn't panic. Her pulse remained steady, but she recognized a truth in that shadow. Things here were going to test her patience, her limits, and her restraint. And Riley was ready. The prank she anticipated would come soon. She could feel it in the energy shifting around her. Cadets like to test boundaries. They like to push people until they broke. Riley had never broken. She had survived ambushes, firefights, and betrayals far worse than a few high school-level hazing rituals. But she had learned the most important lesson of all: wait, watch, and strike when the moment is right. She closed her notebook and leaned back, letting her mind drift through a series of simulations. She imagined the cadets scrambling, the confusion, the fear. But it wasn't just about revenge, it was about teaching them respect, discipline, awareness, something they had clearly lacked. And yet she didn't move. Not tonight. Let them overestimate her. Let them underestimate her. There was power in patience, a truth every soldier learned in combat. Riley was patient. She was methodical. She was deadly. As the night deepened and the cadets finally drifted into restless sleep, Riley's gaze lingered on the shadows dancing across the floor. Somewhere in the darkness, a misstep would happen, and when it did, she would be ready. The new girl had arrived, but the base had no idea the storm it had just welcomed. The next day, the first prank would come, and Riley would be waiting, calm, precise, unstoppable. Morning came sharp and unforgiving over the naval training base. The sun cut through the barracks windows, glinting off polished metal and muddy boots alike. Riley Morgan had already been awake for hours, reviewing her notes from the night before, cataloging the cadets' personalities, patterns, and probable strategies. Each laugh, each gesture, each whispered joke had been stored away like intel from a surveillance mission. She knew the pranks would come. She could feel the nervous, excited energy radiating from the cadets. It started small. A folded note slipped under her door. "Hope you can swim, rookie." She picked it up, weighing it in her hand, then slipped it into her notebook without a word. A few minutes later, toothpaste mysteriously appeared in her boots. One cadet even knocked over her locker, scattering her neatly arranged items across the floor. The noise was loud, a deliberate show meant to embarrass her. Laughter echoed in the hallway. "Guess she doesn't know the rules," one boy jeered. Riley bent down calmly, wiping the toothpaste from her boots and replacing her shoes with precision. She didn't raise her voice, didn't even flinch. Her green eyes scanned the room as though assessing the structural weaknesses of the walls themselves. Inside, her mind was working like a computer, cataloging every misstep, every sign of overconfidence. By midday, the cadets escalated. One of them had decided to test her agility by dumping a bucket of cold water over her as she passed the drill hall. Riley froze for a fraction of a second, her hair plastered to her head, clothes dripping. A few cadets laughed uproariously, but Riley didn't yell, didn't recoil. Instead, she turned slowly, her eyes locking on the instigator. "Interesting," she said softly. The laughter faltered. The cadet blinked, caught off guard. He expected a scream, a shout, or even a shocked flinch. But Riley's voice was calm, controlled, almost too calm. Something about it, the precision of her tone, the way her gaze held his, made him swallow nervously. By afternoon, the barracks were alive with whispers. Who is she? She didn't even scream. She's different. The pranksters, undeterred, moved to plan their final act for the day. They decided to sabotage her locker with glue and a few strategically placed stink bombs. This, they thought, would finally humiliate the quiet, unassuming new girl. They crept into the barracks under the cover of a short break, laughing softly as they worked. But Riley was already aware. From her corner, she had observed every movement, every step, every subtle noise of their sneakers on the floor, every whisper, had been catalogued and memorized. She had anticipated exactly this, not because she was paranoid, but because she had trained for worse situations under far more dangerous circumstances. As the pranksters bent over the locker, their laughter ready to erupt, Riley moved silently. One minute they were alone, confident and giggling. The next they were frozen, unsure why their hands had stopped. She had stepped into the doorway unnoticed, her posture relaxed, her presence commanding. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice calm but with an undercurrent that made them step back instinctively. One of the cadets laughed nervously. Just messing with your locker for fun." Riley's eyes narrowed slightly, but her face remained neutral. "For fun," she repeated. "Interesting definition of fun." The cadets exchanged glances, suddenly aware that something about her wasn't normal. Her stillness, her composure, even her tone conveyed something they couldn't place, a quiet, controlled authority that didn't belong to someone so new. By the time the pranksters left, convinced they had achieved maximum impact, Riley had already reset everything. Her locker was pristine, her gear perfectly aligned, and a small note had been left on the shelf. "Next time, be careful. Observation is ongoing." It wasn't threatening exactly, but it was enough. The cadets later admitted in hushed whispers that it had sent a chill down their spines. The rest of the day passed with a tense, almost electric energy. Riley attended drills, joined training exercises, and completed every task with methodical precision. When a cadet tried to trip her during a running drill, she pivoted effortlessly, barely moving, and regained her balance without breaking stride. The boy stumbled instead, falling flat on the muddy field. The other cadets tried to laugh it off, but the fear had started to seep in. During lunch, Riley sat quietly at a table in the mess hall observing. She watched the cadets closely, the ones who led the pranks, the ones who followed, the ones too timid to act. She noted alliances, weaknesses, strengths, and overconfidence. Each movement, each laugh, each bite of food was a data point. By the afternoon, whispers had turned into quiet warnings. "Don't mess with her," one cadet muttered. "I'm serious, she's not normal." Riley didn't hear. She was focused on her training manual, her hands flipping the pages carefully, marking notes in the margins. She wasn't intimidating on purpose. Intimidation was a side effect of control, and in control she thrived. But as the sun began to sink and the shadows grew long across the base, Riley's mind wasn't on the day's minor victories. She was already planning for the next. Because while the cadets believed they were testing her, she had been testing them. Every prank, every challenge, every laugh had been recorded in her mind like a tactical map. She knew exactly who was bold, who was reckless, who could be manipulated with a word, and who would crumble under pressure. And she knew that soon, the situation would escalate not in childish games, but in lessons they would never forget. The evening drills were brutal, as expected. Cadets ran laps, carried weighted packs, and executed precision tasks under the watchful eyes of the instructors. Riley moved seamlessly through it all, her endurance and skill evident to anyone paying attention. When one cadet tried to nudge her during formation, she didn't stumble. She didn't even flinch. She simply shifted her weight, and the boy nearly lost his balance instead. His friends laughed nervously, unsure whether to join in or retreat. By the time the day ended, the pranksters had regrouped. They whispered among themselves in the dimly lit barracks. "She's different," one admitted. "I don't know how she did that." "Yeah, we need a new plan," another said, eyes darting to Riley as she unpacked her bag methodically. Something bigger. Riley glanced up, catching the glint of their fear. She smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly, before returning to her notes. Outside the window, a shadow moved, faint but deliberate. Riley's gaze followed it, sharp and unwavering. She wasn't just aware of the cadets, she was aware of everything. Every sound, every flicker of movement, every possibility had been noted. That night, as the base settled into an uneasy silence, Riley lay in her bunk, her mind racing. She reviewed every encounter of the day, every challenge, every laugh. She mapped out the cadets, likely next moves, calculated potential outcomes, and imagined the perfect responses. This wasn't just about revenge or proving superiority. It was about control, awareness, survival, respect, and Riley had never failed at any of those. Tomorrow would be another day, another test, another opportunity for the cadets to make the mistake of underestimating her, and when they did, Riley would be ready. Because she was no ordinary cadet, and the base had no idea the storm that had just arrived in their midst. The first pranks had come and gone, but Riley's countermeasures were already in motion, and the day after tomorrow the real lessons would begin. The sun burned high over the training grounds, turning the asphalt paths into a shimmering wave of heat. Cadets lined up for the obstacle course, chattering nervously, their duffel bags slung over shoulders and boots scuffing against the gravel. Today, the hazing had escalated to a more public test. The boys had decided to challenge Riley, to see if the quiet, mysterious new girl could handle physical trials as well as social ones. Riley stood at the edge of the course, arms crossed, her green eyes calmly scanning the obstacles, the rope climb, the mud pit, the high wall, and the swinging beams. To the cadets, it was just another challenge, a test of strength and endurance. But Riley didn't see it that way. Every element of the course was a puzzle, a set of variables she could exploit, a space to demonstrate control. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, didn't waste energy on arrogance or showmanship. "Ready," the instructor barked, blowing his whistle. The cadets moved first, scrambling over the ropes, flinging themselves into mud, slipping and sliding, their laughter mixed with groans of exertion. Riley's turn came. She didn't charge, she didn't rush. She analyzed. Every grip, every foothold, every swing was precise, deliberate, almost surgical. Her movements were fluid, efficient, a predator navigating terrain it had hunted across 1,000 times. She swung up the rope, using perfect momentum to reach the top in half the time it took the first male cadet. The boys stared, slack-jawed. One muttered, she's insane." The next obstacle was the high wall. Cadets flailed, some needing assistance to scale it. Riley approached, measuring it with a flick of her wrist, then vaulted with a combination of strength and technique that left a small cloud of dust on the opposite side. She didn't even break a sweat. The pranksters exchanged uneasy glances. The air had changed. The invisible hierarchy had shifted. But Riley's mastery wasn't just physical, it was psychological. At the top of the swinging beam, she paused, surveying the cadets below. The boy who had dumped water on her the previous day froze when their eyes met. Riley's gaze held him like a predator fixing on prey, quiet, unyielding, and impossibly calm. He stumbled backward, nearly losing balance, and the others laughed nervously, unsure if it was relief or fear. Then came the final test, a mud pit that required coordination, strength, and mental focus to navigate. The cadets plunged in, slipping and floundering, some screaming in frustration. Riley entered, moving like a shadow across the mire. Her body slid with balance and precision, every step calculated to conserve energy while maximizing speed. She reached the far side before the first cadet had even completed the halfway point. Silence. Then whispers. "She's too fast. Does she even get tired? Who is she?" Riley didn't respond. She simply stepped out of the mud, water dripping from her uniform, hair plastered against her face. She wiped a hand across her brow, and in that single motion the pranksters realized something they hadn't before. Riley wasn't just skilled. She was a weapon in human form. As the cadets regrouped, trying to mask their embarrassment with forced laughter, Riley leaned against a fence, calm as a lake but coiled with potential energy. She had expected this challenge, anticipated every stumble they might make, every overconfidence they might display. And she had used it to teach them something they wouldn't soon forget. Underestimation was dangerous. Later, during a break, one of the cadets, the same one who had been bold enough to throw water on her, tried to approach her, a smug grin plastered across his face. "Not bad for a rookie," he said, half joking, half challenging. Riley looked up slowly, her green eyes scanning him from head to toe. "Not bad," she echoed, her voice calm, deliberate. "Interesting assessment." He blinked, unsure whether she was serious or mocking. Inside, a flicker of unease appeared. Most people expected intimidation to be loud, aggressive, or in your face. Riley didn't intimidate that way. Her silence, her stillness, her confidence, it was heavier than any shout. "Thanks," he mumbled, retreating awkwardly to his group. Riley allowed herself a faint, almost imperceptible smile. She didn't need to prove anything. The fear, the doubt, the respect, it was already forming. She simply let it simmer. The next exercise was hand-to-hand combat. The cadets were paired off to spar in a controlled environment. Riley's partner, a confident upperclassman who had been mocking her since day one, approached with a smirk, assuming he could easily overpower her. The match began. He swung wildly, trying to land a quick strike. Riley moved as if reading the fight before it happened, deflecting, dodging, and countering with minimal effort. Every move was calculated to teach, not to harm. Yet each strike was precise enough to remind him that brute force alone would not win. Within minutes, the upperclassman was out of breath, his movements sloppy, his confidence shattered. Riley remained composed, breathing steadily, every motion fluid. She didn't even need to pin him down. His own frustration and exhaustion left him vulnerable enough to concede without humiliation. The other cadets watched in awe. Their jokes, their mocking, their assumptions, all dissolved in the shadow of Riley's quiet dominance. By the end of the day, the mood had shifted. Where once the cadets had laughed at her quiet demeanor and assumed weakness, now there was a palpable tension in the air. Every glance in her direction carried hesitation. Every smirk that once dared her to fail now faltered under the weight of doubt. But Riley didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She merely noted in her mind and in her notebook the strengths, weaknesses, and tendencies of each cadet. Every action, every choice, every slight misstep was a data point for future decisions. The pranksters huddled later in the barracks, whispering in disbelief. She's not human," one admitted. "Yeah," another agreed, voice low. "I thought we had her figured out. I was wrong." Meanwhile, Riley quietly observed them from across the room. A faint, almost imperceptible smile tugged at her lips. They didn't yet know the half of it. She wasn't here to play games or to win points. She was here to teach them lessons about respect, caution, and awareness, lessons that would leave an impression long after the pranks and exercises were forgotten. By evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Riley returned to her bunk. The cadets, now wary and unsure, kept their distance. She reviewed the day in her notebook, her handwriting neat and precise. Every interaction had been documented, every movement analyzed, every potential threat or misstep cataloged. Outside, shadows shifted across the base as night crept in. Riley's eyes followed them calmly, unblinking, calculating. She had anticipated the day's challenge. She had dominated it physically, mentally, and psychologically. But she also knew that the cadets would regroup. They would plan, they would scheme, they would test her again. And when they did, she would be ready. Because Riley Morgan wasn't just a new cadet. She was a trained operator, a SEAL combat expert, and a force that the base had never encountered before. As the cadets slept, restless and uneasy, Riley lay awake, reviewing the day in her mind. The first real challenge had been overcome. The second would be more complex, and by the time it ended, the base and the pranksters would understand one inescapable truth. Riley Morgan was not to be underestimated. Tomorrow, the pranks would continue. But Riley had already won the first battle, and the real war was only beginning. Night had fallen over the base, but the barracks were anything but quiet. A few cadets whispered in corners, planning the next stage of their pranks against the new girl, their bravado masking a growing unease. The rules had always been simple: embarrass the rookie, test her limits, have a laugh. But Riley Morgan was no ordinary rookie. She had observed every nuance of their behavior, every overconfidence, every mistake. And now she waited. The first attempt came shortly after lights out. A group of 3 pranksters crept silently toward Riley's bunk, duffel bags in hand, carrying glue, stink bombs, and an assortment of sabotage tools. Their mission: ruin her supplies and humiliate her in a way she couldn't ignore. They froze at the edge of the bunk room, peering into the darkness. "She's asleep," one whispered. "We'll be in and out before anyone notices." Riley was awake. She had been awake for hours, reviewing mental maps of the barracks, memorizing the cadets' positions, and cataloging every creak of the floorboards. Every shadow, every whisper, every twitch of a body in the darkness was already accounted for. She didn't move, she didn't need to. As the first cadet stepped forward, Riley's hand brushed the edge of her notebook on the bed. A faint click sounded, almost imperceptible, but enough to make the first prankster freeze. His eyes darted nervously. "Did you hear that?" he hissed. The second cadet laughed quietly, shaking his head. "Relax, she's asleep." Riley exhaled silently, her green eyes scanning the room. She didn't need to touch them, her presence was enough. Each step they took, each whispered joke, each adjustment of a bag was catalogued, analyzed, stored. She knew their patterns, their weaknesses, and their overconfidence. Then came the first lesson. The glue bottle in the first cadet's hand slipped deliberately, though they didn't see it, and toppled, spilling across the floor. The cadet cursed under his breath. Before he could react, Riley moved with perfect silence, stepping into the shadow behind them. She didn't even need to touch them. The moment her eyes fell on the leader, he felt a weight pressed down, a silent warning. By the time the pranksters realized what was happening, it was too late. The stink bombs were harmlessly disarmed, her locker was locked with her precise skills, and every item was meticulously realigned. And on the shelf, a small note had been placed, written in neat, precise handwriting: "Observation complete. Measures ready." The pranksters retreated, pale-faced and shaking. They couldn't explain why they felt violated, humiliated, and powerless, all without Riley saying a word or raising a hand. The next morning, whispers of the night's events rippled through the base. "Did she catch us?" one cadet asked nervously. "Caught us? She didn't even move," another replied, voice trembling. "I don't get it." Riley, however, didn't need to participate in the gossip. She walked into the mess hall calmly, taking a seat at a table in the corner. Her eyes, bright and calculating, scanned the room. She noted the cadets who had attempted the prank, who had been complicit, and who had been bystanders. Every action, every reaction, every flinch had been recorded. By mid-morning, she initiated her own subtle strategy. It wasn't about brute force or intimidation, it was about control. While the cadets had been trying to test her patience and skill, she had been turning the tables, creating a psychological trap. Notes were left in lockers, tools subtly rearranged, and whispers of her presence deliberately amplified through her calm, almost invisible actions. One cadet, trying to sneak into the supply room to set up another prank, found the door mysteriously locked. He tried again, jiggling the handle and muttering curses, only to discover that all of the other doors leading to her bunk had been silently monitored and subtly tampered with. Panic began to creep in. By lunch, the cadets were on edge. Their casual arrogance had evaporated, replaced with caution and uncertainty. They whispered to each other, half expecting traps or hidden eyes. Riley, meanwhile, observed from her table, calm as ever, her green eyes scanning every movement. Every twitch, every glance, every footstep was recorded. A small incident at the water station highlighted the shift in dynamics. One cadet, emboldened by yesterday's physical challenge, tried to spill water on Riley as she filled her bottle. He grinned, confident in the repeatability of his prank. Riley didn't flinch. She didn't even raise her bottle. Instead, she adjusted slightly, letting the motion of his arm work against him. The cadet slipped on the wet floor, nearly toppling over before catching himself. His friends watched silently, no laughter escaping. The message was clear. Attempts to undermine her were no longer safe. By evening, the pranksters huddled, their arrogance replaced with genuine fear. They whispered among themselves, strategizing, planning a larger prank to regain control and respect. But Riley had already anticipated it. She knew who would volunteer, who would hesitate, and who would falter. She had mapped their psychology like a tactical grid. Later, as night fell, Riley checked her equipment. Her knives were aligned, her personal gear organized with surgical precision. Every trap they might have set during the night was neutralized before it could even begin. She left subtle indicators, enough for the pranksters to know someone was watching, yet they didn't know who, where, or how. From the shadows, she observed one of the prank leaders lurking near the bunk doors, clearly scouting for an opportunity. Riley didn't move. She didn't speak. But her gaze alone, focused and unwavering, sent an invisible signal. The cadet froze mid-step, then slowly retreated, glancing over his shoulder as if the air itself was aware of him. The base, for the first time, was not just a playground for arrogance and bravado. It had become a chessboard, and Riley Morgan was already several moves ahead. Every prank, every whisper, every attempt to undermine her was now a variable she controlled. That night she made final notes in her notebook, a mental map of the cadets' weaknesses, strengths, and tendencies. Her observations were meticulous. The prankster who acted first out of bravado, the follower who panicked easily, the one who hesitated and overthought. Every detail would inform her next move, ensuring that when the cadets next tried to test her, they would unknowingly step into her carefully orchestrated plan. Outside, shadows shifted as the base settled into uneasy silence. Riley's eyes followed the movement of a lone figure across the yard. She didn't flinch, didn't panic, didn't even speak. She simply observed, cataloging. She was always aware. As the night deepened, Riley allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. The cadets believed they were testing her. They believed they had the advantage. But they were wrong. Every move they made, every action they took was already accounted for. The lesson had begun, invisible, quiet, yet utterly undeniable. Riley Morgan was no ordinary cadet. She was a strategist, a predator, a master of subtle dominance. And the cadets had just learned the first rule of survival: underestimate her at your own peril. Tomorrow, the pranks would continue. But Riley had already rewritten the rules of engagement. She would not be caught unaware again. And when the next challenge came, it would be hers to control entirely. The unseen skills had been revealed. The psychological advantage was established. And the pranksters, though unaware, were already ensnared in a web they couldn't see. The morning sun spilled over the base, painting the barracks in a harsh, golden light. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, leather, and anticipation. The cadets moved with a nervous energy, whispering as they filed into formation. They had survived Riley Morgan's silent dominance so far, but something had shifted. The laughter of the pranksters had faded into wary glances and hesitant movements. Riley walked among them, her steps measured, her gaze sweeping the rows of cadets like a hawk assessing prey. The boys who had dared to humiliate her were now almost invisible in the room, not because she ignored them, but because she didn't need to acknowledge their presence. Her calmness was unnerving, a quiet gravity that unsettled even the most confident cadet. During the morning PT session, Riley's eyes scanned the formation, noting every tremor of fear, every shift in posture, every micro-expression of anxiety. She observed the prank leader, the one who had thrown water and attempted the locker sabotage, as he tried to mask his tension with forced energy. His movements were sloppy, predictable. Riley filed it away. The instructor barked commands, and the cadets obeyed, running laps, lifting weights, performing push-ups with gritted teeth. But as Riley executed the exercises, it became painfully clear who was truly disciplined and who merely relied on bravado. Her movements were precise, fluid, and controlled. Every motion displayed perfect efficiency, a level of training that made even the strongest cadets falter in comparison. It wasn't just her physicality that unsettled the group, it was her presence. A cadet attempting a jump over the wall hesitated, his mind racing. Riley's calm, green eyes caught him mid-step. For a fraction of a second, he felt exposed, vulnerable. His arms wobbled and he stumbled. The others stared, a mix of awe and fear growing in the pit of their stomachs. During hand-to-hand drills, the same pattern repeated. Riley's partner, a cocky upperclassman who had mocked her the day before, lunged recklessly. She moved almost imperceptibly, redirecting his energy, using his force against him. Within moments, he was off balance, struggling to maintain composure while Riley remained composed, breathing evenly. "You rely on strength," she said quietly, almost conversationally, "but strength without control is useless." Her words weren't loud, but they cut through the clamor of the training yard. The cadets froze, unsure whether she was addressing them or speaking to herself. The upperclassmen blinked, too embarrassed and exhausted to respond. By lunch, whispers had spread like wildfire. "She's dangerous," one muttered. "I don't know how she does it." "She's not joking," another replied. "She's precise, like she can see everything before it happens." Riley, meanwhile, ate calmly in a corner, her green eyes still observing, cataloging. Every movement of the cadets, every twitch of muscle, every flicker of uncertainty was stored in her mind. She wasn't merely participating in the exercises. She was controlling the narrative, establishing dominance without raising a hand or losing composure. After lunch, the pranksters decided to regroup, attempting to regain some semblance of power. They whispered in corners, plotting a show of force to remind everyone, including Riley, that they were not to be taken lightly. They were confident, naive, and unaware that their every move had been anticipated. Riley noticed the planning. She didn't intervene, not yet. Observing them was enough. Her mind traced their tactics, predicted their next steps, and prepared subtle counters. Later, during the afternoon drill, the cadets were paired for a relay exercise. The prank leader, still determined to assert his dominance, tried to sabotage his partner, nudging him and creating chaos. Riley, paired with another cadet, moved seamlessly through the course, assisting when necessary, correcting mistakes without comment, and executing every maneuver with deadly precision. The cadets couldn't help but watch her. Even the prankster's eyes flicked to her involuntarily, drawn by her calm confidence, her perfect execution, her quiet authority. It was hypnotic, intimidating. They were beginning to realize that she wasn't just stronger or faster, she was in total control. By evening, the tension had escalated to a palpable level. The pranksters huddled in the corner of the barracks, whispering furiously. "She's not like anyone we've ever seen," one admitted, voice low. "She doesn't even have to fight, she just dominates." Another nodded, swallowing nervously. "I thought yesterday was bad, but today was worse. She's terrifying." Riley, of course, heard none of this. She was quietly observing, writing in her notebook. She didn't need to confront them directly. Her presence was enough to instill fear. Subtlety was more powerful than brute force, and Riley had mastered it. As night fell, the cadets struggled to sleep. Fear had replaced arrogance. Every shadow seemed to move with purpose. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like a warning. The prank leader, who had orchestrated the earlier attempts to humiliate Riley, tossed and turned in his bunk. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, and in a sense he was. Riley, awake and alert, reviewed the day's events. She cataloged every interaction, every hesitation, every flinch. She noted who had performed well under pressure and who had crumbled. Her notebook was a blueprint of control, a map of psychological and physical strengths and weaknesses. Her green eyes drifted toward the window, watching the shadows shift across the yard. The pranksters thought they were clever, that they could plot in secret. But Riley's awareness extended beyond the obvious. Every plan, every movement, every intention was already anticipated. The cadets had underestimated her, and now the realization of their miscalculation was beginning to take root. They didn't understand it yet, but the rules had changed. The base, once a place for arrogance and games, was now a chessboard, and Riley Morgan was several moves ahead. As she closed her notebook for the night, Riley allowed herself a faint, almost imperceptible smile. The cadets believed they were still in control. They believed they could challenge her, push her limits, and regain some sense of superiority. They were wrong. Tomorrow would bring another challenge, another test of both courage and wit, and Riley would be ready. She had already won the first victories, not through force alone, but through the quiet mastery of observation, anticipation, and subtle psychological dominance. In the barracks, the pranksters whispered nervously, their confidence shaken. For the first time, they doubted themselves, their abilities, and each other. Riley had turned the dynamic entirely, and they didn't even realize how. Outside, the wind rustled across the base, carrying with it the quiet hum of tension, anticipation, and fear. Riley's eyes followed the shadows, always calculating, always aware. The cadets had been challenged physically, tested mentally, and now their perception of control had been shattered. The lesson was only beginning. Tomorrow the pranks would continue, but Riley Morgan had already established herself as a force to be reckoned with. The cadets had learned their first true lesson in fear, and the next one would be far more personal, far more intense. The night was still, the kind of darkness that seemed to stretch endlessly across the base. Most cadets had finally drifted into sleep, unaware that the quiet hours were about to become their most dangerous. Riley Morgan lay awake, eyes open, scanning the shadows. She had catalogued every prank, every misstep, every laugh, every whisper. She had anticipated each moment that the pranksters might think themselves clever, and tonight the final lesson would begin. It started with a sound barely audible, a faint scuff on the wooden floorboards outside her bunk. 3 figures crept silently toward her room, duffel bags clutched in their hands, glancing around nervously. The pranksters were determined to execute one last, high-stakes stunt, tying Riley up while she slept, a staged humiliation they could boast about later. Confidence surged in their hearts. They believed themselves untouchable. Riley didn't flinch. She had already been awake for hours anticipating this moment. Her training kicked in silently, muscles coiled, senses heightened. Every creak, every whisper, every step was accounted for. The shadows weren't hiding anything from her. She knew exactly where they were, what they intended, and how far they would go. The first cadet reached for the strap of her duffel bag, crouching low to avoid detection. Riley's hand moved like a phantom, barely a blur. Before he could complete the motion, he felt a soft but firm grip on his wrist. He froze, heart hammering, as Riley's green eyes met his, calm and unyielding. "Step carefully," she whispered, her voice so soft it was almost hypnotic. The boy's knees went weak. He stumbled backward, scrambling to maintain balance, and nearly collided with his accomplices. Panic erupted. The second cadet swung at her, thinking brute force would solve the problem. Riley sidestepped effortlessly, her motion fluid and precise. In one swift movement, she grabbed his arm, twisted it behind his back, and immobilized him without causing serious harm, but enough to send a clear message. The third cadet froze, realization dawning too late. The 2 behind him were already neutralized. Riley's eyes tracked him, calculating, precise. She advanced with perfect timing, cutting off escape routes. The cadet's bravado crumbled as he backed into the wall, helpless against a force he had underestimated. "You thought this would work," she said softly, almost conversationally. You thought I would be unaware." They stammered, struggling to find words. Fear had replaced arrogance entirely. Riley released the first two cadets after ensuring they were contained and watched as their confusion grew. The third cadet was shaken, trembling under the weight of her control. Riley didn't need to strike aggressively. She didn't need to yell or use force unnecessarily. Her presence alone had asserted dominance. Every subtle motion, every precise placement of hands and feet, every controlled exhalation was a calculated display of power. By the time she stepped back, the pranksters were in a state of raw fear, their minds racing to understand what had just happened. She released them fully, allowing them to retreat, but left a final message behind, a neatly folded note on the bunk table of the lead prankster. Written in perfect, precise handwriting, it read, "Playtime's over. Respect is not optional. Remember this night." The cadets collapsed into their bunks, hearts racing, unable to sleep. Their bravado had been destroyed, replaced by annoying, creeping fear. Riley, however, remained seated at her own bunk, calm and composed, reviewing the night's events in her mind. She had neutralized the threat without unnecessary violence, ensured control, and left a psychological mark that would linger far longer than physical pain ever could. By morning, the base was already buzzing. The rumor spread like wildfire. The new girl had been prepared, had anticipated the prank, and had subdued the pranksters before any damage could be done. Whispers in the mess hall carried tones of awe, disbelief, and fear. Even instructors noticed the tension in the cadets' posture, the hesitation in their movements, the lack of confident chatter. Riley, however, moved through the morning routine with her usual calm precision. She joined the lineup for drills, her posture perfect, her gaze scanning the room. The cadets who had attempted the prank avoided eye contact, their whispers stifled. They had learned something fundamental. Riley Morgan was not to be tested, underestimated, or challenged. The first training session of the day was a physical relay. The pranksters were hesitant, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. Riley moved through the course with fluid precision, assisting when necessary, correcting mistakes subtly, and executing every motion with perfect control. The message was clear. Any further attempt to challenge her, physically or otherwise, would be met with overwhelming skill and unerring awareness. By afternoon, the psychological impact became even more apparent. Cadets who had previously mocked or underestimated her now kept their distance. Whispers of caution replaced laughter. Every glance in her direction was measured, careful. Even casual movements were tempered by the lingering fear of being observed and outmatched. During a strategy exercise, Riley further cemented her dominance. The cadets were tasked with navigating a mock combat scenario, testing both physical agility and tactical thinking. While most relied on instinct, Riley anticipated every move, every misstep, and every potential hazard. She corrected partners subtly, predicted opponents' actions with flawless accuracy, and completed objectives efficiently without drawing attention to her skill. The prank leader, now hesitant and wary, attempted a challenge to reassert control. He approached her during a mock engagement, trying to dominate a small maneuver. Riley responded with calm precision, redirecting his momentum, demonstrating her mastery without overexertion. He stumbled, frustration and fear colliding, and she simply stepped back, allowing him to recover but leaving a clear, unspoken warning. By evening, the cadets had collectively internalized a truth they could not articulate. Riley Morgan was untouchable, not merely because of strength or skill, but because of awareness, anticipation, and control. She had rewritten the rules of engagement within the base, and every attempt to challenge her had only reinforced her dominance. Later, as night fell once again, Riley reviewed the day. Her notebook was meticulous, every cadet accounted for, every psychological and physical pattern mapped. She had neutralized threats, established dominance, and ensured that any future challenges would be easily anticipated. Outside, shadows moved across the base, whispering threats of pranks or rebellion. Riley's gaze followed them calmly. She didn't need to chase, fight, or shout. Her presence alone ensured respect, fear, and compliance. The pranksters lay awake in their bunks, haunted by the events of the night before. Their minds raced, trying to comprehend how a single cadet could neutralize three opponents without a single aggressive strike beyond necessity. They had learned something fundamental. Riley Morgan wasn't just strong, fast, or skilled. She was untouchable, calculated, and always 3 steps ahead. By the time the sun rose again, the base had shifted irreversibly. Cadets whispered her name in awe, their arrogance replaced with cautious respect. Riley had established her control not through dominance alone, but through intelligence, observation, anticipation, and psychological mastery. And somewhere in the shadows, new challenges were already forming. But Riley Morgan was ready. She had neutralized the immediate threat and ensured that any future attempt to challenge her would be met with the same precision, efficiency, and calm ferocity that had already marked her as untouchable. The night's strike was more than just a lesson in control. It was a statement, a declaration, and a promise. Underestimate her at your own peril. The pranksters would remember this night forever. And the base, for the first time, understood that Riley Morgan was not just another cadet. She was a force, a strategist, a predator who could strike without warning and dominate without brute force. The morning sun rose over the sprawling naval training base, casting long shadows across the barracks and training grounds. The air was thick with tension, the kind of charged energy that makes every step, every movement, every whispered word feel loaded. The cadets moved cautiously now, aware that a single misstep could draw Riley Morgan's scrutiny. Even those who hadn't interacted directly with her carried a subtle unease, their previous bravado replaced by measured caution. Riley moved among them with her usual calm precision, notebook tucked under her arm, green eyes scanning, always calculating. Her dominance was no longer just physical, it had become social. Cadets who once mocked or pranked her now instinctively deferred, altering their behavior even when she wasn't looking directly at them. Her control was subtle, invisible to the untrained eye, yet undeniable in effect. During morning drills, a group of upperclassmen tried to reassert authority, attempting to order the younger cadets into a formation with exaggerated force. Riley observed quietly from the sidelines, noting their timing, tone, and body language. When one cadet barked a command too aggressively, Riley adjusted her posture slightly, a subtle shift in the angle of her head and shoulders. The cadets nearest her unconsciously mirrored her composure, causing the leader's display of authority to falter. He paused mid-command, awareness creeping in that the energy in the room had shifted, and that Riley had set it. By midday, the rumor mill was in full swing. Whispers of her abilities, both physical and psychological, had spread across the base. Cadets spoke in hushed tones about her precision, her calm under pressure, her almost preternatural awareness. Some said she was a prodigy, others muttered words closer to fear. During lunch, Riley sat at a corner table observing. Her notebook lay open in front of her, but her eyes were on the subtle interactions around her. Alliances forming, rivalries flaring, micro-expressions revealing hidden thoughts. She didn't need to speak. The cadets' own actions and words fed her understanding. Her first social maneuver came quietly, almost imperceptibly. Two cadets, previously part of the prankster group, began whispering and laughing with each other, trying to regain confidence. Riley approached, her movements slow, deliberate, and unthreatening. One of the boys straightened automatically, a subconscious gesture of respect. Riley didn't speak at first, simply observing, letting her presence communicate dominance. Then in her soft, even voice, she said, "Trust is earned. Respect is given to those who understand the rules, and consequences follow those who ignore them." The cadets froze, not because she had raised her voice, but because every word carried authority, unyielding and calm. They understood immediately. Riley wasn't just observing, she was defining boundaries. Her social intelligence was as sharp as her combat skills, and the boys felt the shift in power keenly. The afternoon brought practical exercises in tactical coordination. Cadets were grouped for mock combat simulations, requiring teamwork, strategic thinking, and adaptability. Riley's team was paired with several upperclassmen, including the remaining pranksters, who still nursed bruised egos from her previous displays of dominance. From the beginning, Riley controlled the flow. She assigned roles intuitively, predicting who would falter under pressure and who would overcompensate. When a cadet attempted a reckless maneuver, she corrected them subtly, using language, gestures, and presence rather than direct command. The others, seeing her calm confidence and unerring accuracy, deferred to her instinctively. By the end of the exercise, her team had completed every objective flawlessly, while other groups struggled with coordination and mistakes. Cadets whispered again, now openly, "She's not normal. She's always 2 steps ahead. How does she do it?" Riley didn't answer. She simply recorded observations in her notebook, cataloging behavior, tendencies, and reactions. Her focus was on influence, not praise. She understood that her real power lay not in fear or brute force, but in shaping the behavior of the base itself. That evening during downtime, Riley implemented her next social maneuver. The cadets were gathered in the common room, a low hum of chatter filling the air. She walked among them, nodding alliances and fissures. Pausing near the pranksters, she dropped a quiet, almost casual comment about teamwork and trust, a subtle nudge designed to reinforce her dominance and reshape the social hierarchy. The effect was immediate. Where the pranksters had once held informal influence, their authority evaporated. Younger cadets who had been timid or uncertain began seeking Riley's approval instead. Subtle eye contact, a nod, or a brief smile from her conveyed guidance and unspoken permission, while a small frown or quiet disapproval signaled boundaries not to cross. In hours, Riley had restructured the base's informal hierarchy, placing herself at the center, respected, feared, and acknowledged as a leader. That night, Riley returned to her bunk, but she didn't write in her notebook immediately. Instead, she reviewed the day mentally, tracing interactions, recalculating influence, and mapping future possibilities. The base had been reshaped subtly, quietly, and she had done it without confrontation, violence, or overt command. Her control was psychological and social, a far deeper dominance than any prank or drill could achieve. From the shadows outside, a faint rustle alerted her. Riley's eyes flicked toward the window, calm and focused. One of the pranksters had lingered, trying to observe her, perhaps to plan another challenge. But Riley had anticipated this. She didn't move, she simply allowed her presence to fill the room, and the cadet froze, retreating slowly, aware that he had crossed an invisible boundary. The base had learned to watch her, to fear her, to respect her, without her needing to act aggressively. And Riley had learned something critical. Influence was more powerful than intimidation, and control was most effective when it was invisible. As the night deepened, Riley's mind remained active. She reviewed her plans for the next day, exercises to test endurance, drills to challenge psychological resilience, and subtle maneuvers to maintain her influence over the cadets. Each cadet had been categorized, each behavior analyzed, each weakness and strength mapped. By the time she slept, Riley's control over the base was more absolute than any of the cadets realized. Even the instructors, unaware of the full extent of her influence, noted the shift. Cadets were more disciplined, more attentive, and more cautious. The pranksters, once confident and mocking, were now hesitant, deferential, and careful. Riley had reshaped the base's culture without firing a shot or raising her voice, using precision, awareness, and subtle strategy to assert dominance. Outside, the shadows shifted across the training grounds. Riley's eyes followed them, calm and unblinking. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new exercises, and new opportunities to reinforce control. But she was ready. She had already established her position, and every move by the cadets now played into her awareness. The base had changed. The pranksters had lost their influence. Respect and fear now radiated from Riley Morgan, invisible yet undeniable, and the cadets would learn in the days to come that challenging her was no longer an option. It was a dangerous, costly mistake. The morning air was sharp and biting, carrying the faint scent of salt and sand from the nearby coast. The cadets lined up on the training ground, uneasy, alert, and silent. The previous week had been a whirlwind. Pranks, challenges, and quiet dominance from a girl they once underestimated. Now, the entire base was aware that Riley Morgan was no ordinary cadet. She wasn't just physically capable. She was a strategist, a predator, and a master of influence. Riley approached the formation calmly, notebook in hand, her green eyes scanning every cadet, every movement, every twitch of muscle. The pranksters, still reeling from the psychological blows of the previous nights, avoided direct eye contact. Even the most arrogant upperclassmen kept a cautious distance. Riley had rewritten the social order of the base without a single explosive confrontation, but today would mark the apex, the final demonstration of skill, control, and dominance. The instructors had set up a high-intensity training exercise, an obstacle course that combined endurance, precision, tactical thinking, and teamwork. Normally, it was a test of physical ability, but Riley viewed it as the perfect stage to consolidate her influence. She didn't need to act aggressively. She only needed to demonstrate mastery, visibility, and control. The whistle blew. Cadets surged forward, muscles straining, boots pounding the asphalt, hands gripping ropes and walls. Riley moved like a shadow through the chaos, precise, calculated, and fluid. She scaled the rope with the speed of a seasoned operator, vaulted the walls effortlessly, and navigated the swinging beams with the poise of someone entirely in control. By the time the first cadets were halfway through the course, struggling and panting, Riley had already completed it, and she hadn't rushed. Every motion had been deliberate, every step calculated to conserve energy and maximize efficiency. The cadets all grew with each flawless movement, their whispers blending with the pounding of boots and shouts of frustration. But Riley didn't stop at physical dominance. The exercise included tactical decision-making. Cadets had to work together to navigate a simulated hostile environment. Panic erupted as some groups faltered, making mistakes that would cost them time. Riley's team, however, moved like a single entity, guided by her subtle cues. A glance here, a small shift of posture there, and her cadets instinctively corrected course, avoided mistakes, and completed objectives with precision. From the sidelines, instructors noticed the shift. They had never seen such coordinated efficiency, especially led by a rookie. Cadets who had once mocked or ignored Riley were now following her lead instinctively. Her influence had become tangible, manifesting in their actions without a word. Then came the final challenge, a simulated capture scenario where cadets were tasked with rescuing a comrade while evading simulated threats. The pranksters, still smarting from previous failures, attempted to regain confidence. They moved recklessly, attempting bold maneuvers to outshine Riley, but she anticipated every move, every misstep, and every overreach. One by one, the pranksters faltered. They misjudged distances, failed to coordinate, and were subtly herded into traps Riley had predicted. She moved among them calmly, offering guidance only when necessary, letting the exercise expose their weaknesses while reinforcing her dominance. A particularly bold cadet attempted to challenge her directly, trying to take command during the exercise. Riley's green eyes met his, calm and unyielding. In a fluid motion, she intercepted his attempt, redirecting his energy and subtly asserting authority. The cadet's confidence crumbled instantly, replaced by a mix of awe and fear. By the time the exercise concluded, Riley's team had completed every objective flawlessly. The pranksters, humiliated but unharmed, were left to reconcile with their failure. The whispers spread across the base. She had not only survived every challenge but had elevated everyone around her, reshaping their behavior, their respect, and their perception of power. After the exercise, Riley gathered the cadets in formation. Silence fell, not the tense silence of fear, but the attentive silence of respect. The pranksters, once bold and defiant, avoided eye contact, humbled by the precision and foresight Riley had displayed. In her calm, measured voice, Riley addressed the group. Strength is not measured by brute force, speed, or dominance over others. True strength is awareness, control, and respect for yourself, for your team, and for the rules that govern us. Her words resonated deeply. The cadets, who had once sought to test her limits through pranks and challenges, now hung on every syllable. They realized the lessons were far deeper than physical training. They were lessons in respect, discipline, and understanding the consequences of underestimating others. As Riley stepped down from the formation, the pranksters approached quietly, their demeanor respectful, almost reverent. The lead prankster, still hesitant, finally spoke. We understand now," he said. "You're incredible, we shouldn't have doubted you." Riley's green eyes softened slightly. She didn't need to gloat. The lesson had been learned, the hierarchy redefined, and the respect she had earned was unmistakable. "It's not about proving yourself to others," she replied. "It's about understanding the boundaries, learning from mistakes, and acting with awareness." Even the instructors, observing from the sidelines, could not help but acknowledge her mastery. Riley Morgan had turned the base upside down, not through rebellion or arrogance, but through quiet strength, precision, and psychological insight. As the day ended, the cadets filed back to the barracks, subdued, thoughtful, and forever changed. Riley returned to her own bunk, notebook in hand, recording the day's events, observations, and outcomes. Every cadet's reaction, every tactical success, every subtle display of influence was meticulously documented. Outside, the shadows of the base stretched long under the setting sun. Riley's gaze followed them calmly, her mind already cataloging possibilities for tomorrow, for future exercises, for challenges that had yet to arrive. She didn't just survive the pranks, the challenges, or the social tests. She had mastered them, turning the base itself into a landscape of calculated influence and control. That night, as Riley lay in her bunk, the pranksters whispered among themselves, trying to comprehend what had happened. Their laughter had been replaced with quiet respect and a healthy fear. They had learned the ultimate lesson. Riley Morgan was untouchable, a strategist, a predator, and a force far beyond their reckoning. The base had been reshaped irreversibly. Cadets moved with awareness, teamwork, and caution. Hierarchies had shifted, respect had been earned, and fear had become a quiet, unspoken reminder of her dominance. Riley Morgan had not only survived, she had conquered, not through aggression or cruelty, but through precision, awareness, and intelligence. And somewhere in the shadows, the base seemed to hum differently. The echoes of the pranks, the challenges, the exercises, all pointed to one undeniable truth. A new apex had emerged. Riley Morgan had arrived, and the base would never be the same. The pranks were over. The challenges had been met. The cadets had learned the value of awareness, respect, and strategy. And Riley Morgan, calm, precise, and untouchable, had proven herself not just a rookie, but the master of the base.